So, Temple, a lot of people assume that you were born and raised on a farm. Can you tell me where you were born and raised and how you became acclimated to livestock?
Well, I was raised in Dedham, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston. No contact with cattle. That all started when I was a teenager. And I went out to my aunt's ranch when I was 15, went out to the West. Also, I was at a boarding school that had a little tiny dairy, and I learned how to milk cows there. So all of my experience with cattle started as a teenager. And that brings up a really important thing. Students get interested in things they get exposed to.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't been exposed to cattle as a teenager, I would not be in the cattle industry today.
So, speaking of the cattle industry and starting out, can you tell me how you started with Cargill?
Well, one of the big projects I did with Cargill was the first center track restrainer for beef cattle. And I'd been working out in the industry with a lot of different plants, and we were trying to figure out a good plant to do the very first project in. And one of the things that's so important when you're introducing a new technology is to have early adopters that want to make it work. I want to really thank the Cargill Skylar plant for being totally behind this project and helping to make it work. And that's where the first center track restrainer was installed this summer of 1989.
So between you and CSU, Colorado State University, and Cargill, what does that relationship look like today?
Well, we're through PACO training at the Cargill plants. I've been a PACO instructor ever since PACO got started. I think it was 2004. And Cargill's been super cooperative on that. That's been really good.
So let's talk about PACO. PACO stands for Professional
Animal Auditor
Certification
Organization. And the very first audit that PACO trained people on was the AMI audit, American Meat Institute audit, the scoring system that I developed using very simple measurements, 5 simple measurements to evaluate animal handling at a packing plant. So we're all using a very simple scoring system to evaluate plants. And I'll tell you, things were bad back then.
Yeah.
Lots of broken equipment, lots of management problems. And I saw more change in cattle handling and stunner maintenance when you had those big customers auditing it than I'd seen in 25 years prior to that.
You started in 1971 or thereabouts in the beef industry, designing animal handling facilities. Do you think it's safe to say that you are the OG of animal welfare? Do you know what OG means?
I don't know what OG means.
Original gangster. You were the one that started it.
Well, I certainly was the one that first started looking at handling. Yeah. And when I first started doing this, some of them were kind of skeptical. But then when they started seeing the changes it made, some of the people that were the biggest skeptics became the biggest supporters. When you can just make things work so much better. And we took some of those older plants that did not have state-of-the-art facilities, and we made them work. Oh, it's amazing.
So if you were to challenge Cargill to think differently, whether it's animal welfare, employment, retaining talent, how would you challenge Cargill?
One of my big concerns I have throughout the meat industry, also throughout all industry, is the loss of people who think visually. I'm what's called an object visualizer, and I talk about this in my book, Visual Thinking. And people like me cannot do higher math. I worked with machine shop people that built the first center track restrainer that were probably autistic, and they can't do algebra either. We've got to be introducing kids young to tools. We've got kids growing up today, never used a ruler, never used a tool, and we need the skills of the visual thinkers who can't do algebra. This is one of my biggest concerns right now.
But what do you think the biggest misconception about autism is within our society?
The problem you have with autism is they've changed the diagnostic guidelines, and now you've got a situation where you're going from Einstein and Bill Gates at one end of the spectrum. Someone like me, I had severe speech delay. And then you have about 20 or 30% that remain very disabled. They have no speech. They may have epilepsy and other neurological conditions on top of autistic behaviors. So you have this huge spectrum. This is why it's so important to have very good early intervention. I was in early therapy, age 2.5. I saw a video just the other day. little autistic kid was lining up little plastic horses in a line. Well, you know how you start working with them? We take turns lining up the horses. That's how you start working with these kids. And we've got to start working with them. You don't wait 2 years to do nothing. You've got to start working with them now. I think one of the most important takeaway, and I do a lot of talks to businesses, is the first step is you have to understand that different kinds of thinking exist. And a lot of so-called normal people are mixtures, but I'm an extreme object visualizer. So the very first work I did was to get into chutes and see what cattle were seeing. And they'd be afraid of something like a shadow. You have object visualizers, art and mechanical. Those are the things that object visualizers do. Can't do algebra. I'm very concerned that a lot of my kind of thinker, including me, would not be able to graduate my school today. That different kinds of thinking exist, and we need these abilities.
You've been to every corner of the world, looking at livestock, training folks, speaking about autism. What's your favorite place?
Well, I've had places where I've had some very good times in Australia, and some favorite places are places that made me really think about things. And just before COVID, I went on a trip to the Australian outback, and that really got me thinking about where cattle kind of belong in the whole ecosystem, and led me to write a paper about grazing.
Okay.
People forget that 20% of the Earth's land can only be grazed. Eastern Colorado is a good example. It's too arid for crops. And if you do grazing right, you improve land. We need to be doing grazing and rotation with crops, cover crops, graze them. And instead of animals being terrible things to get rid of, they can be a really important thing for improving soil and improving land. And I kind of really thought about this as I got on a plane, a small plane, twin-engine Baron. I got to sit in the co-pilot seat, and we flew 2 hours out of Darwin, Australia, straight south, over nothing. Over land where there's only one use for that land, grazing.
Crazy.
What do you do with the outback? And then all of a sudden, in the middle of nowhere, there's a cattle station. That made a big impression on me.